Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Saturday conversation. I'm delighted to be joined by John this morning. I actually think it's your Saturday conversation, but we're doing it the other way around. Is that right?
That's correct. It should be my turn.
That's okay. That's absolutely fine. It's my absolute joy to be here with John. It's just not only the most amazing colleague at Avon Valley Churches, but also a dear friend of mine, and I'm grateful for all the time that we get to spend together. So thank you, and thank you for this opportunity as well. How much do you think people know about you, John? Would you like to share anything about yourself that you think people might not know?
Well, I'm not sure. It depends on what it is they'd like to know about me. But I mean, basically, I'm a Norfolk man. I was born in Kings Lynn. I'm a war baby, born in 42. I was born the night that the school that I eventually went to, there was an incendiary bomb dropped on it. My one kind of special piece of war baby news is that when my mother was carrying me, a doodlebug went overhead in the garden when she was walking in the garden, and she froze. And my father saw her from the sitting room window and actually went into the garden and brought her indoors. And later on, this is the extraordinary thing, later on I actually did some what they call regression therapy, and was able, believe it or not, to actually go back and experience some of that that frozenness in the womb. And I have a theory that people who were brought up during the war sort of carry a kind of an innate anxiety. It's not always sort of very evident, but there's an underlying sort of underlying current of anxiety, which is experienced by lots of people. So I'm not sure what else you need to know. I have a sister, sadly, who's just developed Alzheimer's. She's about 18 months older than I am. Born in Kings Lynn, went to the Church of St. Margaret of Antioch, which I've spoken to on here before. So you know all that bit. And from the age of 13, 14, I wrote a little pamphlet, which was called, I read a little pamphlet, which was called Who Would Be a Priest? And I wish I still had the pamphlet, because it was a black and white pamphlet, and there was this rather depressing looking guy with one of those sort of square suitcases on. Like, I didn't think, oh, I want to be one of them, but I was obviously sort of touched by what was written inside it. So there.
Very interesting. I'm fascinated by what you said there about regression therapy. I think there are lots of sometimes Christians struggle with things like regression therapy because they don't quite see how it sits within the Christian faith. What would you say about that?
What, therapy?
Yes, therapy in general. I mean, right. I've heard people be specifically quite wary about things like psychotherapy, but even regression therapy, because it's not necessarily just about the here and now, but also trying to actually connect with something that you might not be able to know about, as it were, without this particular means. I've got a very good friend who's she's called the Quantum Wizard. Actually, she's one of the people that I'd like to put you on here, Ildiko. And she talks so much about energy. She's written a book actually that's doing very well at the moment. And I'm fascinated by how other people live their lives and the things that they draw comfort from, and the things that, and because often the vocabulary that Ildiko and I will use is very similar. to describe whatever it is that it might be.
Yeah.
So
I think my take on this is something which my guru, Richard Raw, talks quite a lot about and has made a lot of sense to me. When he says everything belongs, and I've thought about that quite deeply, because yes, I belong to a nation. Yes, I belong to the universe. Yes, I belong to humankind. Yes, I belong to a family. Yes, I belong to a partner. Yes, and I belong to God. And there's a sense in which this connectedness has been there from the beginning, because God is, as it were, from the beginning. So I have no difficulty at all about getting in touch with what is part of me, part of my old self, part of my old, my young self. I mean, we have no difficulty in saying to people, oh, well, she acts like a teenager, or he's so childish. So we don't actually mean they've gone back to childhood, but what we're actually saying is that they're exemplifying some of the behaviors and maybe some of the attitudes that were around when we were a child or adolescent. So this regression therapy was done under a kind of hypnosis. It wasn't actually hypnosis, but certainly rang bells with me as something which was a significant part of my life. I don't want to make too much out of it, but I mean, it's, and the war clearly affects people. We know that in extreme cases, people suffer from severe trauma, as sadly now we witness on the pictures from Ukraine.
yeah, and I think as well, sometimes, because we've had so many conversations, haven't we, John, about so many different, every single aspect of life. And I think you are so right in what you say, that sometimes it's not, we can be being impacted by something that maybe we're not even totally aware of at this moment, but as you have that conversation and you have an opportunity to kind of dig back, you can realize, oh, actually I do carry the pain, the suffering, the worry from that time. And it's very interesting as well how other people affect us in that. So as you say, that particular instance for you was yourself and your mother at the same time, sharing that particular moment together. I find it absolutely fascinating. I remember there was a series of programs actually about regression therapy, and they were that I loved them. They were brilliant. They were in the morning, I think. I think my children must have been young, and I found them fascinating that they took these so within the session, these people managed to actually go back, and they were looking at more rather than within your own life. They were looking at past lives.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, which again, sometimes doesn't sit very well with Christians and the Christian faith. But I was fascinated by some of the things that people were able to just talk about from 500 years ago. And on one level, you sort of think, oh, is this really a thing? But then on another level, every single one of those people who was videoed at that time, filmed at that time, they definitely, as a result of the therapy, felt better in some way. So I
mean, there is the one of the standard, if you like, psychological books on this is called Other Selves, Other Lives, by a guy called Richard Woolger, who is a regression therapist. And I also have a story of somebody else who was on my substantive training course when I was doing therapy, who I worked with quite a lot. because she actually experienced that she had been present at the beheading of Mary Antoinette, and I suppose I worked with her off and on about this feeling, this awareness, for 2 years, and I was convinced over that time that there was, or there is, we are connected. We are connected with the energies of the past. I mean, we think science thinks it knows everything there is about life. Actually, it knows just a fraction. And what's always exciting is to start entering those realms, hopefully with an open mind, because they bring such riches, rather than closing them down. I mean, Richard Ward says if we box them up, we sever the connections. Like, open up the box, let's see what's in them, and enter the unknown in a way. I mean, the one things that Christians actually probably find most difficult is actually living with not knowing. And lots of the great spiritual writers actually in the past have actually, in fact, there's a book called what is it? Something of Unknowing. Yeah. So that's always an interesting thing, isn't it, in Christianity, about certainty and not knowing. And I think we dance. I can't say we, I can say I dance constantly between, yeah, I'm sure about that, and oh, I'm not sure about that. Faith and doubt, I guess. Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm doing in a couple of weeks' time, I'm visiting a Gurdwara with the Church Mission Society. And I'm really, really excited about going and seeing them feed thousands of people as they do in Birmingham. Because I think, as you say, somehow we've got to recognize the things that we share and the things that are good. And if those things are good, then surely they must come from the God that we worship. And I'm like you, John. Well, I know that we're very similar in the way that we approach this, because we're both very much people who like to hear other people's story. We want to understand in a different way, and that's why we're always willing to engage with people from different faiths, different backgrounds, and so on and so forth. And yes, I think there are so many things. I completely agree with you about that point, that there are times when you have to hold things in tension. My most recent thing, actually, after losing my brother, is really accepting that I don't, knowing that he's now gone, but also knowing from my perspective that for me, this was not the right time. So that's always going to be a tension for me. I can't process that because it's happened and I didn't want it to. So that is always going to stay there as one of those tensions in my life. And I'm just fascinated by how, having been through this process, and anybody who's lost anyone prematurely will also understand what I'm saying here, that you suddenly see things from a very different perspective. So it's one thing saying, you know, somebody's, I struggle with this a bit, because almost people say, well, it's okay if someone dies when they're 80, 90, 100 because they've had a full life. But when it's a premature death, it's worse. It certainly feels worse because it's often unexpected, as it was in my case. But still, there's just so much for us to understand within that, isn't there, about death and how we view death and how we view what happens after. And do we think that a lot of people have said to me, particularly in Sicily, I have to say, oh, he's gone on to a much better life. And there's part of me that wants to say, what does that look like?
Well, yeah, and it's not unconnected to what we have actually been talking about, is it? Interestingly, because there is something about, if you like, entering this mystery, that this energy of God, if you like, that is very existence. We know what it's like now, or we have glimpses of what it's like now. Maybe those glimpses will be turned into what, you know, the poets call the beatific vision, the the banquet, or whatever it is. I mean, there's going to be, I mean, the metaphor is, going to be lots of it, and it's going to be wonderful. So I don't mind how it is. I mean, but it seems to, even if it's like, if it's energy, well, it's like, well, I know what energy is like. Well, I used to know what energy was like, but I think I have probably sufficient of it, you know, to keep my glimpses going, anyway. Because I do believe, for me, the only thing that keeps me going is glimpses. I've never had these I'm not a Christian who's actually had all these incredible conversions and flashes, and, you know, I get glimpses of God's majesty in the most unexpected places in people's lives and in different places. And I'll tell you that the last bit I heard from my son this morning. I was having a conversation with my son this morning about the war in Ukraine, and he was recalling that a Ukrainian came across a wounded Russian soldier who'd obviously got on the end of a bullet and what have you. And this Ukrainian soldier got out his mobile phone, and he said to this Russian soldier, ring your mum, ring your mum. And I thought, in the midst of this war, to have, that was a piece of majesty. That was really a glimpse of God doing his stuff. It was wonderful.
And when God's doing his stuff, I've got to respond to that, because I'm totally with you on that. When God's doing his stuff, you can't even articulate it, can you?
No. I mean, words fail. You get it down in your guts. That's where you feel it, or just the wonder of it. And sometimes it is, you know, I haven't. I mean, I had the telephone call at 11 o'clock. Now, until this moment, I haven't thought about it, but it's like, that was a glimpse.
Yeah.
It was a glimpse, and it's enough.
Yeah.
That will keep me going for a bit.
Oh, I agree with you, John. I love that. Listen, we've had a lovely chat. We said that we were going to do 10 minutes. I think we've already done 20, actually.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Oh, well, this is fine. I very much enjoyed talking with you, and go well. Yeah.
You go well as well. To everybody at home, have a lovely rest of the day, and we'll look forward to seeing you on Sunday. I think it's being streamed from Bremer, and I don't know who's doing that. It might actually be me, so look forward to seeing you there. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.